The ragged figure slumped against the dripping brick wall hissed through chapped lips. "Don't talk. Just listen." Officer Hannah Torres froze, every muscle tightening. She had only just stepped from her patrol car when the voice cut through the drizzle like a blade. Her gaze snapped to the man, clothes torn, beard wild, hair matted from the rain. He looked like 100 other lost souls she'd seen on these streets. But his eyes burned with a feverish intensity that made her instincts scream. At his side, a scarred mutt let out a low growl, muscles taut, eyes locked on the alley's shadows as though staring straight at death itself. Hannah's fingers brushed the grip of her holster, nerves alive with warning. Training told her to react fast, to assert control, but the man's tone wasn't rambling or incoherent. It was sharp, urgent, almost commanding. That hesitation held her in place. "Behind you," he rasped again, voice scraping against the night. Hannah's breath caught. Slowly, she twisted at the waist, scanning the narrow strip of darkness between overflowing trash cans and rain-stained walls. The drizzle tapped metal lids, water coursing down rusted pipes. Nothing. No movement. But her gut clenched so tight it hurt. And the dog's growl deepened, hackles spiking high, vibrating with menace. The man raised a shaking hand, pointing with skeletal fingers into the shadows. His lips trembled, but his voice carried iron. "He's there. Been watching since you pulled in. Followed you." "I saw him." Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears. She pressed her back against the cruiser, gun hand tightening, eyes narrowing on the alley's edge. Rain came harder, blurring the world, drumming a merciless rhythm that only heightened the dread. Her voice cut sharp into the night. "Who's there?" The words echoed off wet brick and returned hollow. Silence. Then, barely audible, the scrape of shoe against pavement. Fast, nervous, too close. The mutt exploded in a single bark, sharp as a gunshot. Hannah whipped her flashlight beam forward, slicing through the sheets of rain. The light caught a blur, someone bolting from the shadows. Steel glinted. A knife. Hannah's hand jerked for her weapon, every nerve on fire. But the ragged man's voice shattered the chaos. "Don't shoot! Knife! He'll cut you!" The figure lunged, blade raised high. Hannah sidestepped instinctively, boots slipping on wet asphalt, heart pounding like a war drum. The mutt lunged too, teeth bared, snarling thunder into the night. Time fractured. Every second stretched razor-thin. Hannah's finger hovered over the trigger, but in that sliver of hesitation, the homeless man surged forward. With a raw grunt, he hurled his frail body into the attacker, crashing them both into the puddled street. Hannah froze, gun raised, unable to fire without risking the only ally she didn't expect. The mutt barked and snapped at the assailant, forcing him to twist and fend off both teeth and fists. Rain poured harder, soaking uniforms and rags alike, turning the struggle into a blur of shadows and violent movement. Hannah circled, breath sharp and fast, searching for a clear shot. The knife slashed dangerously close to the homeless man's face, inches from ending him. Still, he clung to the attacker's arm with desperate strength. Hannah fired once, straight into the air. The crack shattered the night like lightning. The attacker flinched, startled just enough. In that heartbeat, the ragged man wrenched the knife free and hurled it. The blade skittered across the slick pavement, spinning to a stop at Hannah's boots. She kicked it hard, sending it clattering far out of reach. The attacker roared, thrashing, but the fight was fading from him. Hannah swooped in, snapping her cuffs free. She slammed his wrist down, locking cold steel tight with a click that rang like final judgment. The man cursed through clenched teeth, thrashing once more before sagging in defeat. The fight was over. Hannah's chest heaved, rain dripping down her face, fingers trembling from the storm inside her veins. She turned at last to the homeless man. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, soaked hair plastered across his forehead. Beside him, the mutt sat once more, silent now, eyes bright with feral pride. Hannah stared, words sticking in her throat. Finally, she managed one breathless fragment. You. For the first time in her career, Hannah Torres understood her survival hadn't come from training, backup, or protocol. It had come from someone the world ignored, someone with nothing who still risked everything. That truth pressed on her chest heavier than the rain. Slowly, she holstered her weapon, eyes never leaving the ragged man. "You could have died," she murmured. The man gave a rough shrug, wiping mud and rain from his brow. "So could you," he rasped. No pride, no swagger, just fact. At his side, the loyal mutt pressed against his leg, a silent reminder of the bond that had kept them alive night after night. Guilt hit Hannah like a blade. She remembered the suspicion she'd felt when she first saw him, how quickly she had judged. She gestured toward the cruiser, an unspoken offer of help, maybe a hospital, but he shook his head hard. "No hospitals," he said, voice carrying a flicker of fear, or maybe shame, something unspoken but undeniable. Hannah paused, torn. Duty demanded insistence. Respect urged silence. Finally, she slipped to her trunk, pulling out a blanket. She draped it across his shoulders. He took it without a word, huddling into its meager warmth. The dog curled tight against him, both shivering in rhythm. Kneeling down, Hannah studied him closer. Beneath grime and exhaustion there was sharpness in his eyes, the kind of clarity born from surviving hell. She remembered the urgency in his warning, the precision. He wasn't just another forgotten man on the street. He had a story buried beneath scars and rain. For a moment, the question burned. How did he end up here? But she swallowed it back. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." Just 2 words, but heavy, raw. The man searched her face, measuring her honesty. At last, he gave the faintest nod. A shadow of a smile tugged his lips as the mutt licked his hand, easing the tension. Relief crashed over Hannah like the downpour above. She had survived, because of him. She raised her radio, voice steady again, calling for backup. Minutes later, flashing red and blue cut across the rain. Uniformed officers swarmed in, securing the attacker and demanding reports. When eyes turned toward the homeless man, Hannah shut down their murmurs with one hard look. She owed him more than they would ever understand. One officer asked who had stopped the attacker. Hannah's voice was sharp, certain. He did. The silence that followed was thick. Some disbelief, some respect. The ragged man shifted, uncomfortable under their stares. He wanted no recognition. He wanted to fade back into the dark. Before he could slip away, Hannah stepped forward. "Wait, what's your name?" He hesitated, then whispered, almost fragile, "Ethan." The sound of it lingered in the rain. Hannah repeated it softly, branding it into memory. Ethan, the man who had saved her life. The storm eased. She offered him a ride somewhere warm. He declined, insisting he was fine. She didn't push, but she left him with food from her car, sealed rations for long shifts. Ethan accepted quietly. His dog's tail wagged at the sight, the only brightness in the bleak street. Blanket wrapped tight, dog at his side, Ethan slipped back into the shadows. Watching him vanish, Hannah's chest ached. She hoped this wouldn't be the last time. Driving away, she replayed the night in her mind, the hoarse warning, the leap into danger, the sacrifice. He had been invisible to the city, but to her, unforgettable. She realized then her duty wasn't only to enforce the law, but to see the humanity in those others refused to see. Tonight, that lesson had been carved into her soul, in rain, in blood, in courage. Hours later, back at the station, drenched and bone-tired, Hannah gave short answers. Some colleagues wouldn't believe her, some wouldn't care. But she knew, somewhere out there, a homeless man named Ethan and his dog were alive, and so was she, because he had chosen to act. And deep inside, she made a silent promise. This wasn't the end. She would find him again. Because heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear rags. By dawn, exhaustion claimed her, but her mind refused to rest. Ethan's voice echoed still, the urgency, the defiance, the raw courage, and with it the memory of rain mixing with fear, steel flashing in the dark, and a stranger stepping forward when no one else could. She wanted to know more about him, but the city had a cruel way of erasing men like Ethan. Faces blurred, stories vanished, and the forgotten slipped into alleys as if they never existed. Still, Hannah Torres couldn't shake the pull. She retraced the same streets, scanned shadowed corners, and quietly asked questions at shelters. Everyone seemed to know of the homeless man with the dog, yet no one could say where he belonged. He was a ghost, walking plain and unseen. Days slid into nights, but Hannah refused to give up. Then, during a lonely patrol in a silent district, her headlights caught a shape she recognized. A man slouched against a crumbling wall, the mutt curled tight at his feet. The dog's ears twitched at her engine, and his head lifted first. Then Ethan's eyes rose, calm but wary. "Thought you'd forgotten," he rasped. Hannah shook her head, stepping closer through the drizzle. "Not a chance." She pressed a sandwich and bottled water into his hands. He accepted without a word, but his gaze softened, the lines of suspicion easing. She lowered herself onto the curb beside him, ignoring the sidelong glances of passers-by. For a long time they sat in silence, rain dripping off the gutter. Finally, her voice broke the stillness. "Why'd you do it? Risk yourself that night?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He scratched the dog's ear, eyes fixed on the pavement's slick reflection. When his reply came, it was quiet but sharp. "Because no one else would. And because you didn't look at me like trash." The words lodged deep in Hannah's chest. She thought of all the times she had walked past nameless figures without a glance. For Ethan, one look had been enough to matter. Over the weeks that followed, she kept circling back. Some nights she brought food, other nights just conversation. Bit by bit, fragments of his life slipped through the cracks. Once he'd had steady work, an apartment, a family. Then came the accident, the bills, the unraveling, and finally, the streets. Through it all, only the mutt, Rocky, stayed. "He's saved me more than once," Ethan confessed, rubbing the dog's head. The way he said it made Hannah's throat tighten. She began to notice his sharp mind. He spoke different languages, quoted books, dissected history with a clarity she rarely heard. "You're wasted out here," she told him once. He gave a bitter smile. "The world doesn't want men like me anymore." But Hannah saw something else, courage wrapped in rags, wisdom hidden beneath scars, and she began to wonder if maybe fate had meant for their paths to cross. One stormy night she found him huddled under a bridge, the rain slamming down like iron nails. She refused to leave him there. "Come with me." "Just one night. There's a cot at the precinct." He resisted, but Rocky nudged him forward, eyes pleading. Reluctantly, he agreed. The moment Ethan stepped into the station, conversations halted. Curious eyes turned sharp. Some smirked, some sneered. But Hannah's voice cut like steel. "He saved my life." Silence fell. That night, for the first time in years, Ethan and Rocky had warmth, food, a roof. He didn't stay long, but afterward he admitted quietly, "It felt strange, like I didn't belong, but like I remembered what it was to be human again." Hannah told him he had never lost that humanity. And, in the quiet that followed, their bond shifted. No longer just gratitude. Something deeper. Something that steadied her as much as it did him. But shadows were never far. One evening, a call sent Hannah to a disturbance at an abandoned warehouse. Her heart sank when she arrived. Ethan was there, cornered by a pack of gang members, their voices mocking, eyes fixed on Rocky. "Police!" "Drop it," she barked, weapon ready. The gang sneered, but the wail of backup sirens shattered their bravado. They scattered, curses trailing in the night. Ethan was left bruised, his face marked by fists, but Rocky was unharmed. Hannah dropped to his side, her hand steady as she lifted him up. His gaze met hers. Gratitude, but also shame at being seen so vulnerable. That night she stayed, longer than duty required. A first aid kit from her cruiser in hand, she cleaned his cuts while the rain drummed on. "You don't owe me this," he muttered. Hannah shook her head. "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." For once, Ethan didn't argue. He let her work in silence. In that silence, something wordless passed between them. Trust, fragile but unshakable. And as the weeks rolled on, that fragile thread wove itself into something stronger. Friendship, maybe more. In the chaos of her badge, Ethan became her calm. Hannah began leaving little notes at the places she knew Ethan frequented, sometimes reminders to meet, sometimes just a few kind words. To Ethan, those scraps of paper were treasures. He folded them carefully and tucked them into the lining of his worn jacket, carrying them like precious keepsakes. Rocky also grew increasingly fond of Hannah. Whenever he spotted her from afar, he bolted toward her, tail wagging furiously, pressing his wet nose into her hand with unrestrained joy. In the cold, indifferent rhythm of the city, a strange bond had formed. A police officer, a homeless man, and a loyal dog creating small pockets of warmth amid the darkness. Gradually, Hannah began to ask herself a dangerous question. What if Ethan could start again? She looked into shelters, rehabilitation programs, even temporary jobs. Yet each time Ethan pushed back with the same weary words. "I'm fine out here." But Hannah saw through the lie. She noticed the heaviness in his shoulders, the silent longing in his eyes whenever they passed families laughing together or cafes glowing with soft light. He wasn't living. He was only surviving, and she refused to let him vanish into the city's forgotten corners. Then came the turning point. One night, Hannah was called to a report of a missing child in the park. Hours slipped by, hope dwindling, parents trembling with despair. Just as the search seemed futile, Ethan appeared with Rocky tugging hard at the leash. "He's in there," Ethan said, pointing firmly at a locked shed. Though skeptical, Hannah trusted him. She broke the lock, and inside they found the terrified boy, huddled and sobbing. Her colleagues stared in disbelief. Once again, the man the world ignored had saved a life, but Ethan only turned away, murmuring, "The dog knew." Hannah couldn't hold back any more. She called after him. "Ethan, people need you." Not just me. Everyone he stopped, his gaze caught by hers. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "You have more to give than you realize. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." Her words cut deeper than any storm ever had. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine something different. Not just wandering, not just enduring, but helping, belonging, being seen. Rocky barked once, as if in agreement. The very next day, Hannah went to her captain. She told him everything. The night Ethan saved her, the child in the shed, the countless quiet acts of courage. At first, her captain dismissed it with a scoff, but Hannah's persistence chipped away at his doubt until, finally, he sighed. "Fine. I'll meet him." When Ethan entered the precinct, the fluorescent lights seemed too harsh, his hand tight on Rocky's leash. He looked out of place, uneasy. But Hannah stood tall beside him, introducing him not as a vagrant, but as a hero. For the first time, disbelief shifted to consideration. For once, Ethan wasn't invisible. He had found his place. Months later, on a quiet evening, Hannah asked softly, "What do you want for your future, Ethan?" He glanced at her, then at Rocky, and back again. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low, "but for the first time in years, I actually want one." Hannah's smile was warm, her eyes shimmering. "Then let's build it together." It wasn't just words, it was a vow, quiet but unshakable. Under the glow of the city lights, with Rocky stretched peacefully between them, a cop and a once homeless man discovered hope not only in survival, but in the fragile promise of a new beginning. The city began whispering Ethan's name. News of the missing child he and Rocky had saved traveled far beyond the precinct. Headlines called him the unlikely hero. For a man who had once hidden in the shadows, the sudden attention felt unreal. Cameras and praise were foreign to him, yet each time anxiety threatened to overwhelm, his eyes found Hannah. Her steady gaze reminded him she saw him for who he truly was, not a symbol, but a man. That authenticity kept him grounded. He didn't need to be perfect. He just had to keep stepping forward, one day at a time. With Hannah's encouragement, Ethan agreed to attend a community gathering. Parents wanted to thank him, children begged to pet Rocky, and officials hoped to hear him speak. He nearly turned back, nerves clawing at him, until Hannah squeezed his hand and whispered, "Just tell them your truth." Standing before the crowd, his voice trembled at first as he spoke of hardship, invisibility, and survival. But then his words shifted to hope, to the single act of kindness that reminded him he still mattered. By the time he finished, the room was hushed, eyes shimmering with emotion. The precinct soon decided to make his role permanent. Though he never wore the badge, his gift for reaching the forgotten became indispensable. He mediated disputes, bridged cultural divides, and even steered restless youth away from gang life. Rocky became a neighborhood legend, his bark carrying the weight of warning and protection. For the first time in years, Ethan felt genuine pride, not pride in money or status, but in knowing he had turned pain into purpose. And through it all, Hannah was beside him, believing when he could not. One evening, Hannah invited him to dinner at her apartment. Nervous, Ethan arrived with flowers bought using his first paycheck. He chuckled at himself, amazed at how awkward he felt about something so simple. Hannah opened the door, her eyes widening at the gesture. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Over homemade pasta, between bursts of laughter and thoughtful silences, a deeper understanding bloomed. They were no longer just allies, they were two hearts carefully reaching toward one another. Still, doubt shadowed Ethan. Alone later, staring into the mirror, he whispered, "What could she possibly see in me?" The scars of his past felt etched too deep. Rocky nudged his leg as if to protest the thought. Hannah never wavered. Every time he tried to push her away, she drew nearer, not with pity, but with respect. She didn't seek to erase his past, only to walk beside him through it. Slowly, Ethan realized that maybe love wasn't about flawlessness. Maybe it was about being seen completely and still accepted. The storms of the city hadn't faded. Crime, poverty, injustice still loomed. But with Hannah and Rocky, Ethan no longer faced them as a man surviving. He faced them as a man building. Sometimes he joined Hannah on unofficial patrols. She in her uniform, he in sturdy boots, Rocky trotting proudly alongside. They made an odd trio, yet to those they helped, they embodied redemption, partnership, hope. Children called Ethan's name, tugging at Rocky's fur. Elderly neighbors offered him warm meals. For someone who once believed he had nothing, every gesture felt like treasure. One afternoon, Hannah's captain summoned her. "You've changed since he came into your life," he said bluntly. She braced for reproach, but instead, he smiled faintly. "For the better. You fight harder, care deeper. Maybe we all needed someone like Ethan to remind us why we wear the badge." Leaving the office with damp eyes, Hannah found Ethan waiting outside, leaning against the wall with Rocky curled by his feet. She whispered, "You're changing more lives than you realize." This time, Ethan didn't argue. He simply let the truth sink in. The turning point came during a city ceremony honoring him for bravery. Standing on stage, Ethan shifted nervously, but the steadiness of Hannah's presence anchored him. When asked to speak, he surprised them all. "I'm not a hero," he said plainly. "I'm just a man who was given a second chance. Don't look at me. Look at those you walk past every day. They matter, too." The words echoed through the hall, and the thunder of applause shook the room. Hannah's eyes glistened with pride. He hadn't spoken for recognition. He had spoken for every unseen soul still out there, waiting for a chance to be noticed. That night, walking side by side beneath the glow of streetlights, the city humming quietly around them, Hannah reached for his hand. Ethan stiffened at the touch, instinct whispering to pull away, but then he let himself stay. Warmth spread through him, chasing out years of coldness that had lived in his bones. With Hannah's faith and Rocky's steadfast loyalty, he had found something far deeper than survival. He had found belonging. "Do you ever think about tomorrow?" Hannah asked, her voice soft in the night. Ethan glanced at her, then down at Rocky, who trotted happily ahead. A small smile tugged at his lips. "For the first time in years," he said quietly, "I actually do." Fragile but real, hope had finally returned. Months later, Ethan unlocked the door to a modest apartment, his first real home in years. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but to him it was nothing less than a palace. Rocky had his own cozy corner, complete with a new bed and toys, gifts from Hannah. One evening, as she knelt to help him unpack a box of worn books, Ethan stopped, his voice breaking with sincerity. "You saved me," he whispered, but Hannah shook her head gently. "No, you saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." Overwhelmed, Ethan pulled her close, holding on as though anchoring himself to a truth he had long forgotten. In that moment, the journey was complete. From invisible man to a soul restored, from shadow to light. And within that new life, love, unexpected and unshakable, had finally found him.